I cared. Shut up, nobody asked. That wasn't the question. Sorry, it's just... I knew that was going to be what some of you wrote when you saw the title, so I wanted to get ahead of the curve. Anyway, so I've never been afraid to say I'm a fan of Genndy Tartakovsky. Yeah, only controversial takes here on the Just Stop channel. No, but for real though, I've always really admired Genndy's work for how he essentially used his career in animation to prove what it can do by never trying the same thing twice. Like, you can pick up on a couple similarities here and there that help to show when something's his, mainly because he's one of the only guys left who still uses thick outlines, to the point he's basically carrying the style on his back so it doesn't die out. But whether it's Dexter, Samurai Jack, Symbionic Titan, Primal, Fixed, Hotel Transylvania, there's really nothing he's done that's just exactly alike, and it's why I'm always really interested whenever I hear he's working on a new project, since if there's one thing you can always count on from Genndy, it's that he's gonna experiment, or at least if the executives in charge of his projects will actually let him, seeing as, oh yeah, if there's one other thing you can count on from Genndy, it's that half the time his projects end up Kennedy'd by the studio almost right after being announced. That's what happened to his versions of Popeye, Astro Boy, The Dark Crystal, an original film called Can You Imagine? Like, the guy's been the head of a bunch of promising shit that never was. And as far as I can find, the only explanation we've ever gotten for why is due to creative differences. Which, if I were to guess, is probably code word for he wouldn't fit into the predetermined boundaries we set from way too much focus testing. And honestly, if that is the case, then I wouldn't be shocked. It kinda comes with the territory. After all, there's no way Genndy would have accomplished even half the shit he has so far if he was always bowing down to corporate suits. Sometimes as an artist, you've just gotta have a line for when they go too far from your initial vision. But you know, that does also make me wonder, what would happen if he had no restraints on a project? Like, obviously he's always had to make some kinds of changes going from idea to product. On the more drastic end, Fixed and Hotel Transylvania were pretty much different movies back when they were pitched, so that could mean there's a chance we've never seen his full vision without any restrictions or edits before. So what would it look like if he did have that control? Well, luckily for us, we don't actually have to wait, since it's called Unicorn Warriors Eternal and it came out over 2 years ago. It's just that, nobody cared? Okay, that's not entirely true, since at least up to release, there was some hype for the series, mainly from animation fans, but if you were around when it was getting released, then you have to have remembered how fast it felt like the buzz for this just died and never picked back up again. Like, I'm not sure I've ever seen a show released on a weekly schedule that had so little word of mouth. There was almost zero discussion after the first 2 episodes, even from channels you'd expect to cover it week to week in excruciatingly boring detail. And so in the end, the thing just sort of came and went and was never heard from again, which personally speaking, I thought was just such a weird thing to see, knowing how much Adult Swim was clearly hoping it would succeed. And Genndy too. If you looked at interviews, he was calling it the work he'd been building up for his whole career, that he'd been trying to get the thing made for 20 years and all the shows he'd done before were just practice and preparation for this. He had a 4-season plan in case it was picked up for more. Shit, the way he was talking about it, you'd think it was going to be his next magnum opus. And considering it was coming off the back of his most critically acclaimed series yet with Primal, you probably wouldn't expect anything less.
Oh yeah!
Huh. Would you look at that? Okay, but why though? Why didn't anyone seem to care about Unicorn after all of that buildup? Was it a lie? Did Genndy fool us all for some currently unknown reason and the real show's gonna drop any day now? Yes. No, it's definitely Genndy's show. There's no way anyone else would base their style off Osamu Tezuka and Fleischer stuff. That's way too specific for anyone else to even think of, let alone actually go through with. It's 100% his, but, alright, there's no getting around it, so I think I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. I think this is Genndy's worst project by a good margin. I mean, like with all his works, there's a lot of ambition and creativity that makes it stand out, especially in a lineup like Adult Swim's that's usually nothing but comedies and weed. But also, I'm not sure there's ever been a project from Genndy that felt more... how do I put this, fanfiction-y? You know, there's a couple projects from Genndy that feel out of his wheelhouse. That was one of the things people got on his ass for about Fixed, since it was just so different from the other things that he directed. But see, I was able to look past that in Fixed, since under all the dick jokes and balls and exposed assholes of that movie, there was still a competent story with emotional arcs and the feeling that it was a professional film from people who knew what they were doing. Whereas with this, like, if you looked at it outside of a technical level, just stripped away the cool visuals and music to check out the content of the writing, you'd probably never think it was done by someone with as much experience as Genndy, given just how sloppy it all is. In fact, sometimes it feels even kind of amateurish. Like, it's so weird. But at the same time, I can also completely understand how it happened, seeing as all the show's biggest issues have really clear root causes. Genndy was working on multiple shows at once with this. Thanks to Primal's success, he had unlimited freedom to make this thing he'd been building up in his head for decades. He was taking a crack at fully serial storytelling, something he'd only kinda done before in TV with Samurai Jack Season 5 to, let's be generous and say mixed results, but those are just the roots of the problems. They aren't what actually kept the thing from being successful. Case in point, most of those same conditions made Has-Been Hotel. And while I've made it pretty clear over the years that I don't really like Has-Been Hotel, like, at all, there's also no denying its completely overwhelming success. So what made Unicorn such a flop by comparison? That's what I'm gonna try to answer here. Yeah, I know you were probably expecting a typically formatted review like I usually make, but in response to that, I'd just like to say, come on, Mom, you never let me do anything fun. You're literally like Hitler. So one of the first things executives want to know when you're pitching a show is, what's the audience? And that's because if you want a show, or really anything, to succeed, you need to have at least some general demographic in mind who's willing to watch it. Like with Has-Been Hotel, for instance, their main audience is young teens. Now, whether or not young teens should be watching it is another topic entirely, but by and large, excluding theater kids and the incredibly annoying, there's no one the show appeals to more than young teens who want to feel like they're watching something mature that they really shouldn't be. It's got violence, swearing, something that feels like depth beyond your average SpongeBob episode, though I'd say that's debatable. It knows its audience, and that's led to it having a lot of success. But you see, Unicorn Warriors Eternal never had that same appeal since I have no idea who this show is for. No, actually, I do know who it's for Gendy. But unlike his other shows, I don't think he's really considered who else it was going to be marketed for aside from him. I mean, not that I'm trying to say it's an unworkable concept or anything. The idea of immortal guardians having their souls reincarnated into different hosts to fight the same immortal villain across time is kinda badass. I can see why he held on to it, but it's the details of the thing where I really start to question, okay, who is this for? Like, first of all, just at a really basic level where it got me confused, this aired on Adult Swim and it's labeled on HBO Max as being adult animation, but I don't see what makes this adult in basically any way. It's not overly graphic or scary, doesn't have anything theming-wise that wasn't twice as bad in something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, no one swears or has any provocative designs, which, funnily enough, you can't say the same for about Tezuka, and it was kind of a freak about furry mouses and animorphs, but, nah, you never see that kind of weird eroticism here, and what a crime it is. At most, I guess there were like 2 dick jokes you could maybe argue were a bit much for Cartoon Network, but aside from that, the only things I could see keeping this from airing during primetime is that kids would probably get bored by it easier. And look, this isn't me saying it's gotta artificially make itself more adult to fit in with the lineup. iGuardian Spice did that, and I'd never wish that fate on my worst enemy. I'm just pointing out that it doesn't feel anything like the type of show Adult Swim would air. That's what Primal was. And you know, I do think there's something to be said about how those two differ, seeing as when you look at the few adult things Gendy's produced before, like Primal or Fixed, there is a bit of a try-hardiness, if you get what I mean, at least at the start of them. Like, the first few minutes of Fixed are by far its raunchiest, Primal's first episode is by far its bloodiest, and I get the feeling that that was very intentional since Gendy clearly knows about the importance of demographics, but he's also not very comfortable with more adult stuff in his work. That's actually something he had to be told by executives to up the ante on when he was writing Fixed, since he was coming at it so weirdly soft, no pun intended. And so I could imagine when he was given the chance to do just what he wanted through Adult Swim and HBO Max, he ended up naturally gravitating towards something that wasn't as risque. Which, hey, on one hand, fair enough. But also, whether or not you like those elements in Primal or Fixed, it did delineate them as being adult. Meanwhile, with Unicorn, if you were just some 20-something trying to watch Adult Swim, you'd probably think you were on the wrong channel and turn it off. Whereas if you're a kid, even though technically speaking you should feel fine to watch it, it's got that adult animation label. And unlike Has-Been Hotel, it doesn't have anything to make your kiddie brain feel like you're watching something adult, so neither the good kids or the bad kids will watch it. There was just no clarity here on who it was catering to. And while some of you might be wondering, but My Adventures with Superman didn't fit with the lineup and it still did well, so why not Unicorn? Well, I think that can be answered by not only that one is better, but also that Adventures obviously knows what demographic it's going for, both in terms of it being a show for tweens to young teenagers and having an art style that tells you it's an action show. Something Unicorn doesn't really do by leaning so heavily into Tezuka and Fleischer, two styles that don't really give you the impression of an action show. Like, sure, Tezuka did do some action-based series like Astro Boy and Dororo if you want to get semantic about it, but by modern standards, that's not what people are gonna think of. And they're especially not gonna think of action when they see a main character whose design is inspired by Betty Boop. Again, it's a cool inspiration and all that's never been done before. I'm not trying to say that I don't like it, but there is a reason it's never been done before. It's confusing when you're trying to establish tone for new viewers. And I know that to an extent that was sort of Gendy's goal here, since he loved how the dwarves in Snow White were goofy but still had an emotional scene when she died, so he wanted to do the same and prove cartoony characters can be used for serious stories, which is a fine idea, but them being cartoony isn't the problem. It's that they make it harder to tell what the genre is. Just look at any of Gendy's other MCs to get what I
mean. Dexter, Jack, Lance, Spear. You see these guys once and you know exactly what type of show they're from. But then you get to the main girl here, Anna/Melinda, and it's way less obvious since it's not quite comedic, but it's not quite serious either. So to your average viewer, even though it's an intentional contrast, it could still give them the wrong idea or come off confusing. Just like it feels confused between its art style and premise. Just like it feels confused about who it's aiming for. Just like it feels confused between doing an ongoing story and not having any idea how to tell one. Wait, shit, I haven't gotten to that yet. Alright, so another big thing that can bring viewers in when you do it right and drive them off when you do it shittily is a serialized narrative. And that's because when you think of it from one angle, hey, ongoing story that keeps you wanting more so you can see how it turns out. But from another angle, oof. Ongoing story that can't keep anything since it never knows what the focus is. And man, Unicorn is about as focused as me trying to write this script without my Adderall prescription. Oh hey, a butterfly. Sorry, what was I saying? I mean, I've already told you a bit of the premise. Unicorn are these warriors that keep getting reincarnated to stop the same evil force before it can wreak havoc, so you'd probably think the main plot of the season has to do with that. Shit like tracking it down, seeing what its plan is, figuring out how to stop it, that sort of thing. But, no. You'd actually be wrong about that, since the villain barely matters at all for most of this. Like, I guess she does do a couple relevant things, like summon a ghost elephant and trap them on a pirate ship, which is, well, barely an inconvenience for them at best. But aside from that, this bitch doesn't do almost anything of note to the point she literally just dips in episode 4 and then isn't even relevant again until she comes back in episode 8. 8! That's almost half the series where the supposed main villain and driving force of the conflict, after barely getting any screen time and causing super minor issues, isn't even around. So for a while it's just like, what are we even doing? The cast think their duty is over, so until it comes back, they're just struggling to find something to keep this thing going. Like, oh no, our job is done, but our lovable robot sidekick is broken. Guess we'll have to go on a journey to fix him after he left no impression on us, and whoa, would you look at that? To fix him, we'll have to work out this other character's boring family issues and unrelated destiny. Oh my god, such natural storytelling, guys! But you know what? Honestly, I can't even pretend the villain leaving is when the story gets monotonous, because like I said, from the start, she's barely involved. So from the start, there's almost nothing to keep the story engaging. And this is a trap a lot of writers fall for when they're writing something serial, since they obviously know about all the benefits of the amazing shows that use it, but they never stop to think about how those great shows use it so amazingly, which is that usually, there's always something that gives it urgency. Take Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's a show that's great not just because it has a serial narrative, but because every episode knows how to keep you watching it. From the start, we learn that Aang's got a reason to keep moving since he's being hunted by the Fire Nation, which no matter where he goes to try and hide from them, end up being just around the corner. And that conflict only gets more interesting when we learn he not only can't just keep running, he needs to nut up and learn all the elements faster than any Avatar has before so he can then kill their leader before he destroys the world. See, at every point in this story, there's something to make you go, whoa, how are they gonna make it out of this? But Unicorn doesn't really have that until episode 9, so up until then, it's got almost zero urgency. And that's not the only thing that makes its plot suck either, because there's another way to make a serial story engaging. Raise interesting mysteries. Who wrote the journals? Why can Aaron become a Titan? What are the gems hiding from Steven? If you can ask an interesting question that gets at least some development over time, then that can get people engaged. And Unicorn almost gets there. It almost has this when it starts with the problem that, whoa man, the physical host for one of the warrior souls didn't lose full control of her body, so now she's a sort of hybrid between the two that can't use her powers well. How did this happen? But you want to know how the show fumbles this too? They don't even care about the question. Yeah, by episode 3, they just wave it away as, oh yeah, the host Anna is really stubborn, so it can focus on the way less interesting question of, but who are Anna and Melinda? Which, by the way, if you were wondering, we find out is that they're both really boring. Anna is just some boring girl, and Melinda is just some boring serious girl who happens to be Merlin's daughter. Wow, what a mystery. It sure was worth devoting half the season to that instead of giving the villain literally anything. And also, why is she a fox? Why is she a fox? Like, we never learned that, and it really pisses me off. But maybe that's my fault for expecting them to answer questions or have an engaging narrative. After all, how could they give time for that when it's already filled with the cast telling us all the fun facts of their world and how vast it is? No, but seriously, every little bit of lore here just needs to be explained. We need to know the intricacies of the Monk Sing's cosmic realm. We need to know how the elf Edred's forest home and the unbroken line of his lineage works. We've got to hear about how the reawakening system functions, even though they do a much better job explaining it over the course of that same episode without giving us much away that could have been used to build mystery if it weren't already explained to us. And shit, you know what my favorite part about getting countless boring exposition dumps is? How there are so many scenes where the cast are just walking around, not doing anything but but talking about it without any urgency since there is none. I love that. And okay, I can see why this happened. It's the same thing that happens when any creative gets 20 years to refine an idea as much as they want. They start focusing on the little details of it, and there's no one who's more passionate about those details than the creators. So when they're given free range like Gindi was for this show, it's kind of inevitable this sort of thing will happen. Why else do you think the prequels cared so much about the politics of galactic trade relations? Creatives can be kind of nerds sometimes, and that's okay, but you need to rein it in. Otherwise, you end up like Unicorn, where these extended dialogue sequences always grind whatever's going on to a halt, don't feel very natural, make it even easier to lose interest, which frankly I didn't even know was possible after a certain point, and a lot of the time overshadow the characters. Like here, it's most noticeable in episodes 5 and 7, where while we learn more about Edred and Melinda and what they've gone through, it doesn't feel very personal, since instead of focusing on the characters' emotions or how it's affected them, these episodes are more caught up in what their backstories say about the lore or how it helps their current situation, which in of itself you don't really care about either, seeing as on top of it having zero stakes or leaving any interesting questions to keep you invested, the cast of this are all just such... Which, I'm not gonna lie, was really surprising for me, since I've seen Gindi's other stuff, believe it or not, and in those the characters always come first, so I figured the same would have to be true here, but it just isn't. Granted, that's partially because of how much time they spend on exposition and lore, which does include the characters' backstories in a super impersonal, distant way, but it's also because the cast just isn't very well characterized and doesn't have any strong dynamics. Like I said before, Anna is a girl, Melinda is a serious girl, the Anna-Melinda hybrid is confused, Edred is a simp, Sing is a space cadet, Copernicus is a silly robot, Winston is simp part 2. Do we ever learn why Edred loves Melinda so much or why Winston loves Anna? No, but their whole gimmicks are fawning over who they think the fusion is, no matter how many times she tells them she's neither. Do we ever learn what Anna's deal is, seeing as part of the fusion's thing is her identity crisis? No, but we still have multiple episodes about her confusion. Do any of these guys get any depth in the 10 episodes we know them for? Nope, but they're still the main characters. And as far as dynamics, it's even simpler, since there's basically only 4 in the whole show. Edred calls the fusion Melinda and she tells him off. Winston calls the fusion Anna and she tells him off. Edred and Winston get mad at each other for saying the fusion's one or the other, and Sing acts ambivalently to everyone since he doesn't give a fuck. That's all the back and forth these characters have. And if you couldn't tell already, that's a bad thing. A really bad thing, especially for a show that's trying to do this whole found family dynamic with its cast. See, one of the major things you want to keep in mind when there's a bunch of main leads in a show is making sure you know what kind of relationships each of them has, since they should all be able to bounce off each other. It's what makes a show like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia so memorable for its cast. If you match up any 2 of the 5 main leads together, you know exactly what type of relationship they have. If Charlie's paired up with Mac, they're chaotic competitive brothers. With Frank, they're little wholesome gremlins. With Dennis, a manipulator and servant. And with Dee, a pair of overconfident idiots who feed into each other's bad ideas. This is what good character dynamics looks like, and I could do it again for any of the other main 5, or even some of the recurring side characters like Artemis and Rickety Cricket, since It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is just that good at this. Now let's do the same thing for Anna/Melinda. Okay, so with Edred, they're a guy and a girl that doesn't accept the guy's advances. With Winston, they're a guy and a girl who kinda doesn't accept the guy's advances, but sometimes does a little bit, I guess. With Sing, they're a girl and a guy who doesn't care, and with Copernicus, she likes him, I guess, I don't fucking know. And keep in mind, this is the character with the most dynamics out of anyone in the show. It only gets less specific from here. So that should probably tell you how unmemorable their entire dynamic is. And I haven't even mentioned the villain yet in this equation, mostly because it's so undefined there's hardly a reason to. Like sure, we get hints at her having some relevance, and there's an ending twist that makes it a little more interesting, sorta, but frankly, at the end of the day, she's just another character the show tried to set up, but never gave enough of a reason to make us actually care about. Same as the main cast and the police commissioner and Merlin and this fucking tiger guy whose name currently eludes me. And all for what? A bunch of meandering plot threads that either don't feel as fleshed out as they could have been or end up being over-explained due to how more than anything, what kept the show from taking off was its... Because one of the things Gindi excels at most is working with simple premises that give him room for the characters. Just think about it. Dexter's Lab? That's about a kid scientist with a lab that his older sister always messes with. Hilarity ensues. Samurai Jack? It's about Jack. He's gotta get back. Back to the Past. Samurai Jack. Primal, caveman loses family, dino loses family, they team up, human-dino racism over. The man thrives on simplicity. But then you get to Unicorn, and it's like you're a 10-year-old explaining FNAF lore to your parents. Okay, Mom, so Unicorn Warriors Eternal is about a group of reincarnated beings originally formed by Merlin who come back around at different time periods to fight off an evil dark entity, but this time something goes wrong, and they're put into the bodies of younger people, which especially affects Merlin's daughter Melinda, whose body host Anna somewhat resists the takeover for unknown reasons, leading to an amalgam of the two that serves as a confusing metaphor for kids growing up and turning into different people. Like, you see how this is a smidge more complicated than anything Gindy's done before? And it's precisely for that reason that everything's so thrown off here. Gindy tried to balance 100 different concepts by himself that were way more complicated than anything he'd done before, and as a result of not having the people he needed to sharpen it up, it led to a show that runs through those concepts with no cohesion, can't seem to tell what its audience is, frequently needs to explain itself to make any sense, usually doesn't know at all what direction it's going in, doesn't put in the time and care we need to feel attached to the cast or their friendship, and all around feels like a jumble of random ideas he thought were cool with no one to stop and ask him, but who is this for aside from you? That's why Unicorn failed. It was too much. You know, it was an interesting experiment, and it's cool Gindy got to let everything loose for his dream show, but I also don't think there's anything else you could blame for the show not doing well than his overambition. Like I said at the start of this, it's obvious that's worked to his favor for a ton of projects, it just so happens that this wasn't one of them. But hey, if nothing else, I'm glad he tried to make something radically different when given the chance, and I'm glad that he still tries to push the envelope on animation, whether or not anyone else is getting on board with him. This time he may have bit off more than he can chew, but if it's in the name of the same ambition he's always had, I'm willing to get a dud here and there if it keeps the variety coming. I may not like everything you've made, Gindy, but I'll never stop respecting you as the generational creative that you are. I've been just stopped, and I hope you keep watching for eternity, because I really need the ad revenue. See ya.